There are many ways to justify the equation, war is hell, but not the least of which is by appeal to the plights of ordinary people caught up in it. In many cases, enemy soldiers are indeed fearsome, but no more fearsome than the authorities in one's own country. In this way, the people made to fight the wars are not unlike the devils of Dante's Inferno, both inflicting the tortures of hell as well as suffering them at the same time. This theme of warfare being the domain of monsters is one that we're going to appeal to in today's adventure. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and today we're going to the domain of dread called Tovag. Or maybe it's Tovag. Is it Tovag or Tovag? Let me know in the comments. Also tell me which syllable to emphasize. I'm going to call it Tovag. This domain of dread has a famous celebrity D&D villain as its Darklord, Kas the Bloody-Handed. Is it Kas or is it Kas? Let me know in the comments. And as with all my Ravenloft videos, we're going to go over what this domain is, list some media that'll help you get an imaginative grip on it, and then sketch out an adventure. In our case, the adventure takes place across 3 acts, taking PCs from level 11 through level 13. That means they will end the adventure at level 13, and with DM's permission could proceed to level 14. And we're going to use the adventure Fire and Darkness from Keys from the Golden Vault, as well as Shadowkeep from MCDM's Where Evil Lives. Before we get to the adventure, however, what is the domain of Tovag? Well, notorious across the plains, the vampire Kas was once the champion of the lich Vecna. Wielding the artifact that bears his name, he betrayed his master, and the resulting battle supposedly destroyed them both. In truth, Vecna escaped and grew in power over the ages and across worlds. Kas, though, was claimed by the Mists, and in his wasteland domain of Tovag, he believes his war with Vecna rages on. Patrols of prisoner soldiers under undead commanders scour the land, dragooning strangers to serve in Kas's armies and to manufacture bizarre war machines. When Kas deems the time right, he sends his forces into the Mists, believing that Vecna's realm lies just beyond. Invariably, these troops never return, leaving the vampire to rage, rebuild his forces, and continue his search for the Sword of Kas, which he considers his key to victory. Okay, so Tovag is a domain whose hapless citizenry are constantly at war with monsters. In this way, it's a lot like the domain of Falkovnia, except, in the case of Falkovnia, the villagers, or the citizens rather, are fighting the monsters that are infecting the domain. Whereas in the domain of Tovag, the citizens are fighting or conscripted to fight under the orders of the monsters. Also, in Falkovnia, the monsters are zombies, but in Tovag, the undead monsters are vampires. So what you have is this land where there are vampire generals and vampire officers battening off of the very people that they conscript, I assume, and forcing them into these squadrons and into these battalions and then sending them off to die. It's very grim and very grisly, and I also like to imagine, because of the mention of war machines in Van Richten's guide, that this is kind of like a techno-vampirocracy sort of thing. I'll get to this when we go over media to help us get an imaginative grip on Tovag, but we already have a sort of Transylvania-esque vampire setting, that's Barovia. Here's another vampire setting, so why not do something a little different with it? And on that note, let's talk about some media to help you get an imaginative grip on this place. Now, the main influences I have in mind for Tovag are actually an old anime and an old Doctor Who series. They were released in 1980, both of them. But there are a few other influences that can also help us out. First is a story that actually doesn't feature any vampires. It's just a story about war and desperation. That's 1895's The Street of the First Shell by Robert W. Chambers. This is indeed one of Chambers' stories in his famous 1895 anthology The King in Yellow, but it's not one that features the yellow sign or the stage play in any direct way. Instead, we follow around a group of desperate people under the Prussian siege of Paris. They struggle to find food and trade and wonder about who's faithful to who to the end. And it's just a good story for generating the atmosphere of human desperation, which the ill-fated inhabitants of Tovag doubtlessly feel all the time. There's also a 1967 short story by Robert Bloch called The Living Dead. Now, this isn't a story about a vampire, but it is a story about a man pretending to be one and hoping to convince others that he is one. It takes place in a wartime setting, actually around World War II, And spoilers for a short story nearly half a century old, it is possible for someone to be too convincing in their theatrical performance. Next, we have the 4-episode Doctor Who series from 1980 starring Tom Baker called State of Decay. I watched this 4-episode series on PBS when I was a kid, and it frightened me and fascinated me so much. On repeated viewings, there's definitely some cringeworthy acting and silliness, but the basic idea is still very cool. In State of Decay, the Doctor and his sidekicks Romana and K9 end up in this sort of dark fantasy setting. It's a very bleak, impoverished setting that's reminiscent of Bram Stoker's Dracula. You've got a huddle of little village houses underneath the shadow of a huge, scary tower. But over the course of the episodes, it turns out that the vampires in that tower, yes, they're vampires, are also like space vampires? Like, vampires are this ancient thing, and that their ancient enemies are in fact Time Lords? And there's this gothic war that's been waged throughout space and time between vampires and Time Lords, and they hate each other, and it involves rockets and lasers and bombs, and the tower in which these vampire lords that the Doctor and Romana found live is actually a bomb that's been embedded in the rock of a mountainside, and they have like a giant kaiju vampire living beneath it, and it's wild stuff and a very different take on vampires, despite having a surface level appearance that is very conventionally sort of Bram Stoker-esque. We're going to borrow from that, borrow from State of Decay, and also borrow from the anime released in 1980, also Vampire Hunter D. Now, not everything about this anime is equally cool, I'll say that much, but the way in which this futuristic, techno-feudal society, actually I guess that's a word people use to mean something else now, handles vampires alongside lasers and giant war weapons is an aesthetic that we would like to keep in mind when we're doing a Tovag adventure. In Vampire Hunter D, you have cybernetic robot horses, and you have these giant rocket ships that are jutting out of the ground that people live in, but it's also still swashbuckling gothic, so we're going to aim for something like that. And finally, there's the 2022 short story by Cassandra Khaw called What is Meat with No God? And it's in that Screams from the Dark anthology from 2022, edited by Ellen Datlow, which I know I've recommended a few times in my videos. That story is beautiful, it's wonderful, just horror poetry, I absolutely love it. One of my favorite little short stories of recent years, and there's even a recording of me reading it on this channel if you want to check that out. In this short story, Cassandra Khaw describes a certain kind of undead mech monster, like sort of a war machine that's also an undead creature. It's a little vague on the details, but enticingly so, and I certainly want to borrow the imagery and the feel of that story for any Tovag adventure that I'd run. And of course, in terms of old school products, there's 1998's Vecna Reborn for 2nd edition Ravenloft, written by Monty Cook. This adventure has a lot of lore about not only Kas and Tovag, but also Vecna and the prospects of Vecna being a Darklord unto himself. In fact, there's also this idea of them sharing a domain and they're forever at war. I think what we have in 5th edition is enough and perfectly adaptable. Okay, with media out of the way, let's now sketch out this adventure. In Act 1, at level 11, after wandering through the mists, the PCs find themselves in Tovag. They are immediately confronted by a troop of vampire generals who attempt to forcibly conscript them into Kas's army. After surviving an attack by this undead press gang, they meet an ally who can help them in a means of escape. Escaping this land that they've just wandered into, that is. In Act 2, at level 12, with the help of their ally, PCs are going to invade Dagger Keep, one of Kas's outposts, and retrieve an item, the Helm of Hated Brilliance, something that Kas fears and which he leaves in that fortress fully guarded. Then, in Act 3, at level 13, with the Helm of Hated Brilliance, the PCs are going to take the fight to Kas in Castle Shifos. Or Zephos, or Xephos, whatever, it begins with an X. That one. As I mentioned before, for Dagger Keep, we're going to use the dungeon for Fire and Darkness from Keys from the Golden Vault. And for Castle Shifos, we're going to adapt Shadowkeep from Where Evil Lives by MCDM. Likewise, we'll replace Count Roder von Glauer with Kas the Bloody-Handed, keeping the same statistics conveniently, however. So let's get this thing started. In Act 1, at level 11, the PCs step out of the mists into the war-torn land of Tovag. The skies of Tovag are a sooty red, clouded with smoke, and the ground is reddened with blood and rust. Huddles of scorched buildings dot the countryside, and occasionally there's the enormous roar of a rocket flying into the air, into the misty sky, or the agonized rattle of the march of conscripted troops. Fire is everywhere, this place is like hell. And no sooner than they arrive than the PCs are confronted by a couple of uniformed vampire generals. We'll call them Castor and Pollux. One of them, a vampire Nightbringer from the new Monster Manual, while the other is a Nosferatu from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Since they're both CR8, that makes this battle a total of CR16, and that should be more than fun for your level 11 party. If you're worried about it being too tough, you could just take away one of the generals and replace them with a sprinkle of vampire spawn instead. Either way, the vampire officials demand that the PCs stand down, surrender their arms, and come with them as prisoner to enlist in Khaw's army. I imagine most PCs would refuse this offer, and instead take it as an opportunity for combat. Assume so. If the PCs, per absurdum, all want to surrender, let the hunger of one of the vampire spawn or one of the generals overtake them, and then they just end up attacking the PCs anyway midway through their surrender. The point is, this is really a way to frame a combat. While the PCs dispatch these vampires, the vampires can talk about how Khaw is the ultimate general, the avatar of war who will lead us to Vecna's annihilation, and all kinds of weird vampire patriotism stuff. And once they have bested their undead foes, the PCs are approached by a human being who runs out from hiding. Her name is Harper, and she's part of a resistance movement against Khaw. She can see that the PCs are indeed powerful, perhaps powerful enough to help her and her organization pull off a daring heist. She offers to lead the PCs to a safe hideout, and as she does so, she'll explain about Tovag, about Khaw, about this endless war that Khaw is hopelessly attempting to wage across the mists against his foe Vecna, and along the way, they can encounter more vampire spawn, maybe another Nightbringer general, and so forth. Once the PCs make it to Harper's hideout, where she has a few of her human comrades waiting, the PCs level up to 12, and we proceed to Act 2. Now, Act 2 is rather straightforward. We're going to adapt and run Fire and Darkness from Keys from the Golden Vault. This adventure is pitched for PCs at level 11, and our PCs are level 12, but we're going to do a couple things to make sure it's sufficiently challenging. First, we're going to remove the quest hook and the characters because we have our own thing going on here. Harper is going to tell the PCs that inside Dagger Keep, that's what we're renaming the place, inside Dagger Keep is the Helm of Hated Brilliance, an item that produces sunlight, which is particularly caustic to Kas the Bloody-Handed. He fears this helmet specifically, and that's why it's kept deep in the heart of Dagger Keep. Harper wants the PCs to venture into Dagger Keep, steal the Helm of Hated Brilliance, and bring it back. Once they've brought it back, they can then hatch a plan to use it against Khaw. Now, as for the dungeon itself in Fire and Darkness, we're going to keep everything the same, but for theme, I would change the salamanders to obedient gallows speakers. I'm sorry, I just love gallows speakers. They're a cool monster. They obey Khaw's orders to forever guard Dagger Keep, and they are filled with the traumatized memories of adventurers that they once were. I would also change the Duergar to undead wights. Again, this is mainly for theme. Kas the Bloody-Handed probably has undead minions, not weird subterranean mythical fairy tale dwarf minions. I would also change the Afriti Jarazun to a Dullahan named Narek. Now, for those of you Ravenloft lore fans, you know that Narek was sort of a son of Khaw that failed in a task and became an undead monster. This is an allusion to that. I would also describe the Arcanoloth Nebukath as looking like a human being, and I would just change his creature type to humanoid. And finally, as mentioned before, change the Book of Vile Darkness to the Helm of Hated Brilliance. This is just a Helm of Brilliance, but it only works in the presence of Kas the Bloody-Handed. Khaw is cursed to be unable to destroy this helm, so he just has it guarded in Dagger Keep. Anyway, you can run Fire and Darkness with these changes, and if your PCs survive, they will exit Dagger Keep with the Helm of Hated Brilliance. At that time, they can level up to 13, and we will proceed to Act 3. In Act 3, Harper and her comrades are overjoyed to see that the PCs are not only alive, but they secured the Helm of Hated Brilliance. Now is the time to strike. After letting the PCs rest and recuperate, Harper gives the PCs a map to Castle Shifos. This map includes a specific secret route, so if you want to just plop your PCs right in front of the dungeon, you can, or if you want to say there's a couple of random encounters before they get there, you could also do that. But Harper directs the PCs to Castle Shifos. And for that, we're going to run Shadowkeep from MCDM's Where Evil Lives. We're going to make the following changes, and not very many, mostly just cosmetic ones. First, of course, we're changing the name from Shadowkeep to Castle Shifos, which is Kas's lair. We're also changing Count Rodor von Glauer to Kas the Bloody-Handed. We're keeping all the statistics the same, what a wonderfully designed monster, but we're just describing Rodor von Glauer as looking like, talking like, and generally being Kas. It's a reskin. Finally, we're going to change the location of this place. Instead of resting atop an icy summit called Drachen Peak, Castle Shifos stands alone and scorched in a blasted heath, where arcane weapons have otherwise burned all life away. It's like T.S. Eliot's Wasteland or something. So change the descriptions in Where Evil Lives to fit this. So instead of falling snow, say that there's falling ash. Instead of extreme cold, say that there's extreme heat. Instead of frozen corpses, say that there are charred corpses. And in general, proceed that way. Make it fire rather than ice. Once the PCs reach Khaw, they are in for a memorable boss fight. One whose completion rips all stability from the land, as happens whenever you slay a Darklord in Ravenloft. The ground splits open, masonry crumbles, the air is filled with Ravenloft Shadowfell mist. Khaw howls for revenge that he will find you, he will find you, he will send weapons and armies to wherever you are beyond the mists, and he will certainly be reborn to be tortured to try. But in the meantime, the PCs will have survived a brief weekend in hell, a brief visit to Tovag. And that's our adventure there. What do you think? Do you think it was too brief, too high level? Did you want me to incorporate more of Kas's historic personality and antagonism with Vecna? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to do all the internet things, click like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell if you want notifications about new videos coming out. And yes, some new videos are coming out. I've been absent for a while, dealing with a few health things and personal job things and so forth, but I'm back at it, and expect some more videos soon. In the meantime, thanks.